Good day everyone. Welcome to the last class of the course Biological Data Analysis and Visualization with R. We have talked about decision trees in the last few classes. In this class we will be talking about something called random forests. Okay, so we will first talk about what are random forests and what is this method, how does it differ from decision trees, and then we will do some hands on. Okay, so as I said, we will be talking about random forest in this class, and the first thing I will be talking about, right, why do we need random forest, right, and how did this method evolve? Okay, to do that, we will first go back into the drawbacks that we talked about, right, in case of decision trees. So one of the major drawbacks of decision trees is that it is sensitive to variation in data. Okay, and this is something you can try out with different training data sets, and you will see the tree structure will change, which will affect the classification accuracy, etc. So to address this, we have come up with this solution. It's called random forest, right? This is something what researchers came up with, and the solution is very simple, right? When you talk about random forest, is build many trees. Okay, instead of just building one decision tree, build many decision trees, and when we are building many decision trees, each decision tree will be built by taking parts of the full data and a subset of the features, right. So, as we said that the trees are very sensitive to variation in data, so these trees will be different, right, from each other. Now, what happens is that the final classification and regression is actually done by taking the output of all the trees that are built. Okay. So, this makes the model more robust, right, and this can then be applied to new data sets, etc. Okay. So, this is kind of a very simple solution, is that instead of building one tree and taking decisions or doing classification or regression, because that might affect accuracy and that might not be very useful if we want to apply that model to new data set. So, we want to build many trees instead of one, and then we build these trees in such a way that we kind of cover for this variation in data. So, these trees will be different, and at the end we do the classification regression by combining the output of all these trees, so that we get a more robust model. Okay. So, that is kind of the idea behind random forest. So, more formally we will talk about the steps of how do you actually build these trees, right, and how do you build this random forest. So, we work with something called bootstrap data, where we are sampling with replacement, and we use decision trees with random subset of variables each step, and random subset of variables means some set of features, right. So, and this could be something around square root of the total number of features in the data set, but that could also be varying. And as I said, we also take only a part of the data set for building the trees. Now, what happens is when we build a tree and then we test the trees, we can test with the data points that were not chosen for building the decision trees, right. So, in that way we already have kind of like training and testing data set available to us, because not the full data set is used for building those trees. So, the data points that were not used for building the tree, they are then used for testing the trees, and this is a process we call bagging or out of bag data set, and this gives rise to something called out of bag error, that gives us like how well these trees or the random forest method is performing. So, why is it important? Because when you run this random forest method in R, you will see this out of bag error, okay, and this is something what this means, right. So, the error that we get in predictions on the data points that were not chosen for building the decision trees. Okay. And the final decision, right, the classification or regression, whatever problem we are working with, is done by voting from the trees, right. So, if we build, let us say 500 trees, and we then do the predictions based on these 500 trees, and the output is given by voting of these trees, right, or maybe average in case of regression. Okay. So, the final decision is kind of taken by multiple trees, not just by a single tree. So, this is what makes the method more robust. Okay. So, now we understand, right, how random forest differs from decision trees, because we are building a lot of trees, right, in parallel, and then we are testing them and taking decision based on the overall outcome, right, from all these trees. So that's what makes this process more robust, and this is why random forest is a more popular method compared to decision trees. Okay, so what we will do now is, with this background, we will go into the hands-on part, right, and we will use a package in R called random forest SRC, and again we can look into this link and you can see what are the functions that are available and with some examples. So, you will kind of understand what is going on. So, we will actually apply this package to two types of problems. One is for classification, the same cancer type data that we have working with. So, we can build classification model with random forest, and then the second type of data will be gene expression noise value prediction, that is our regression tree, right. We have used a regression tree. We have used, for example, linear regression for predicting gene expression noise. So, we will use random forest now to actually predict gene expression noise. So, we can also use we can also build regression trees, right. So, with random forest we can do classification, we can also do regression. So, let us now move on to the hands-on part in R. So, let us go to R console and try out these different data sets and see how well we can perform here. Okay. Alright, so as I said, first we will start with the cancer classification, okay, and we are familiar with this data set already, but again I will load this data set and just briefly mention, right, so that you remember again, right. This is the original data. We have expression levels of 100 genes and the label is cancer type, okay, and this label information is stored here in the data labels, right, in labels.csv, and we can see this here, okay, and again as you have seen, these labels refer to different cancer types. So, we will process this data, and as before, right, you can see there are 0 to 30. So, 31 labels. We have this sample count for each cancer type. This is we have seen already, this is we have generated, and as before we will take only a subset of the data, again because of the time constraints, right, that we have. Okay. We do not want to run this random forest model on a really big data set, because that might take a bit of time, but again you can run it yourself. So, what we are doing very briefly again is we are taking only 50 data points from 5 cancer types out of 31 cancer types that we have, and we are taking only 50 samples from each. So, that is what these rows mean, and then we are taking expression levels of 20 genes and the final label column, right. And these data labels now we are also replacing with these abbreviations of cancer types instead of these 0, 1, 2 values. Once this is done, we are now splitting the data into train and test sets as before, right. Initial split data, 80% of the data should be in the training data, and then we have 20% should be in the testing data, and we are doing this by label, so that all classes are represented equally. Okay. So, we have generated this training data set, right. Again, as you can see, right, these values are here, and similarly we have the test data sets here. Okay. So, for test we have 50 samples, 10 from each cancer type, right, and 40 of those 40 samples from each cancer type is in the training data. Okay. So, now we have loaded this. Now, it is very simple, is how to actually run this model is by saying RF equals to RFSRC label data train. Okay. Okay. So, we have to first load this actually package, which we have not loaded, is the library random forest SRC. That is where this function RFSRC comes in. Okay, if this package is not there, maybe we have to let us see if we have to install this package here. Okay. So, this package, this function RFSRC that we are going to use is actually comes from random forest SRC package. Okay. So, this is now installed and we are loading this library. Okay. And once we are done with this loading, we can now run this RF equals to RFSRC, right. data is training, right, and you can probably see this already here, right. We do not have to do a lot of things, right. So, a kind of summary of the data that is there. So, sample size is 200, right. So, frequency of class level is 40, means in the training data it is 40, right, of each cancer type. Number of trees, as you can see, decision trees have been built are 500. So, you can again change this number, you have these parameters. Again, if you go into the manual of this package and this function, you can see you can change the number of trees that has to be built, you can increase or decrease as you like. So, total number of variables is 20, right, because we are working with only 20 genes. You can of course increase the number of genes. As you increase the number of genes, increase the number of samples, this process is going to take a lot of time, because we are going to build these trees, right, and the method would have to identify the best features for the trees. Okay. And number of variables tried at each split is 5, it is given 5, right, and there some of the things we have not discussed, right. So, splitting rule is Gini, right. So, probably it is using Gini impurity, right, which we have talked about, and there are some, you can see this, right, there are different measures. It is OOB means out of bag, right. We have talked about this already, out of bag log loss, out of bag AUC, this area under curve, etc. AUB requested performance error, all those things are here, and as you can see here is the confusion matrix that is given. Okay. And as you can see, it is a pretty accurate method, right. If you look at the diagonal, right, we always should look at the diagonal. Here the actual values are given in the rows and the predicted values are in the columns, right. And as you can see, most of these samples are classified accurately here. This is on the training data, and misclassification rate is 0.09. So, this is around maybe 10% misclassification, but this is on training data. So, what we have to do now is do the same on prediction, right. So, on the test data, okay, sorry. Okay. So, this is again sorry, this is the RF, this is the training. What you have to do is now run this on the test data, right. So, the command is very simple, predict, run, use this model RF, new data is equal to test. Okay. So, let us try this. Okay. And this is on the test data, and see, let us see how well this performs. So, sample size of test data is 50, right, we know that. Number of trees again 500, we have not changed that, that is the default value. And then you have other scores, AUC, etc. Here it is not out of bag, right. Why? Because in the training, it's the method is trying this out of bag accuracy, right. So, it is kind of those are the kind of the controls, right. That data points that are not used for building tree, they are being used for testing, right. So, that is why you get this out of bag. Here is that already the test data, right, that we are giving. So, it is not building any tree, building any training, doing any training here, right. So, here it is simply predicting on this test data set. Okay. And then what you again we should look at is this diagonal here, right, as you can see. So, observed is the actual classification, and predicted is the predicted classification, right, and there is this misclassification error that is around 0.12. So, it is about 12%. You can see for most classes it looks fine, except maybe 1 or 2 class where you have some misclassification, for example, in BLC and so on. Okay. All right. So, actually the misclassification, most of it is in the BRCA, right. So, this is the observed. So, this is actually actual samples BRCA are 10, right, and out of which only 6 are classified as BRCA and rest are misclassified, right. So, 4 of them are being misclassified into different cancer types. So, again this BRCA classification is actually driving the overall accuracy down. Okay. So, this is something that we have, that we get by default. Okay. So, this is for our classification, cancer classification. What we are going to do is we are going to now use random forest for predicting a value, right, of the response variable, and again we will use this noise data set that we are familiar with. The first few steps are exactly same, right, and we now know what these steps are doing. We are loading this data here, filtered match data east. we are taking this removing these features or columns where we have a lot of NA values, to be precise more than 800. So, we are actually removing those, and then we are filtering doing the first filtering step. We are actually choosing this here, the first this column 4, this is actually our y value, right, the response variable that we want to predict, and then rest of them are features. And then we are doing the second filtering where we are removing these columns out of these features where variance is 0, right. These features are not going to contribute to our model, and we are again taking this, right, and doing this filtering. Again we are choosing only certain number of features. You can run with all features if you want, and that will take a bit longer, that is all. Okay, so once this is done, what we are going to do is we are again going to do the splitting of the data in terms of training data and test data for this sample. Okay. So, we have defined this training index, and training data we are defining from this training index, and training index will be defined by the sampling method. So, it will sample from this input data. 80% of the data should be in the training data, and the 20% is in the test data. So, you have seen, right, we have applied these different methods of sampling and identifying training data or defining test data, right. So, we can apply them any of them, but in case of classification we need to be a bit careful that all classes are represented in the training data as well as in test data, right, otherwise the model performance will suffer. In this case, because we are predicting values, so it does not really matter, right. So, we can randomly pick any types of values. So, that is why we are just choosing any value. We are not restricting by class or something like that here. So, once we have prepared the data, we have training data, test data. Now, we can implement the random forest method. Okay. And this is something again we will use this random forest SRC package, and the command is rfsrc. Okay. So, we will do that here. Okay. And there is an option in this package is that what should happen to the NA values, right. So, as we know in these data sets, we can also look into that, is that there are a lot of NA values here. Okay. So, for example, here there is NA value, there is NA value, right, and as we have seen, right, if you have NA value, the predictions might be NA, right. So, sometimes this happens. So, maybe we can use this NA action is equal to NA dot input, right. So, if you so we can first do without imputation, right. So, we will simply run this. If we do not say anything about the imputation process, so it will run without imputation. So, here is that y, and then we have the features, data is training data, and then this is the model, right, and sample size is 317, and number of trees is 500, it's building number of trees, and then again we have this OB R squared and so on, right. This is we have seen before as well, right. So, yeah, so it's here, right. What we want is this error rate, how much error rate is. Okay, so, for many we have actually NA values, because as I said the prediction might be NA, okay, and the so percentage variance is about 25%. So, it is explaining about 25% of the variance in the data. What is important now is to predict on the test data, okay, and let us see what are the predictions. Okay, so here is the R square is 0.5 and so on. We again will calculate this error rate to, again we have a lot of NA values here, and variation 50%. So, what we have seen, right, because a lot of predictions are NA values, right. So, this is something that could be a problem in our case, right, and what we want to do is we want to do this with imputation here, okay, And for this we have this function, very simply we can say RFSRC, write the formula here, the y that we have to mention, and then rest of the features that will be used for prediction. We are using all features. Data is training data, and this is what we have to mention if you want to do the imputation is na dot action is to na dot impute. Okay, so imputation, we have talked about what imputation is, right? It's kind of trying to guess the na values or the missing values, right? So that's what imputation is, and it might take a bit of time, right? So we have seen, right, we also did the imputation. I have shown you, right, how to do imputation in case of lasso regression. We did not do the imputation because that actually was taking a lot of time. Okay, so I think this is done now, imputation. So let's see, this is OB R squared, right? This is, and then sample size. So earlier, if you have seen that training data was like only 400 because a lot of them were NA values, so they could not be used, so they could not be used for training. And let's look into this. Again, we are calculating this error rate. We still have a lot of NA values here, so that is a bit surprising. And let's see what we have is about 26.48%. What we will also want to do now is predict, right? And we are also doing imputation on the x values, right? And predicted R square is about 0.19. Let's see. And how much variation in the data is being explained, right? So in the test data it's about 20%, and in the training data it's about 26%. Okay, so we have seen, right, how we can build these classification models as well as regression models using random forests, and how we actually can also do, in case of regression model, we can impute the data. We can also do this in case of, for example, the classification model, but in our data we do not have missing values here. So if you want to do this with imputation, you can, in the random forest package, you can actually mention this by saying na dot action equals to na dot impute. Okay, so this is something that is possible. Okay, so we have seen the hands-on for random forest package. So let's now go back to the presentation, right? So we have completed this hands-on. We have done, we have used this random forest SRC package for random forest classification, and we have done two types of analysis. One is cancer type classification, which is a classification model, right? We are predicting different cancer types, and then we have also done gene expression noise value prediction. That's actually a regression model. So to summarize what we have discussed, so random forest method can address this issue of sensitivity of decision trees to variation in data, and this is addressed by building many trees, right? So in our examples you have seen the model is building 500 trees, and where each tree takes a part of the full data, right? It's not taking the full data. So it's kind of like building trees, right? That will be different by taking the variation in data into account and using a subset of features. Okay. Now you have also seen that there is something called out of bag error that is reported here in these models, and this means the data points that are not used for building the trees, they are actually used for testing the models, right? So this is what we have seen in our hands-on as well. We have this out of bag error and out of bag measures that are reported, and the final prediction is done by voting of the trees. So this kind of like takes into account the variation in the data that can occur. So these models that we build are more robust, and they can be used across different data sets. So if we have a new data set now, and if you want to apply this model, these models will perform much better than decision trees. With that, we'll end. Thank you.